The airport was bustling with people, the sounds of rolling suitcases, overhead announcements, and hurried footsteps filling the air. Travelers moved in every direction, some rushing to make their connections, others strolling slowly, seemingly lost in thought. Among the crowd, a woman moved with a quiet confidence. She was dressed simply in a dark jacket, jeans, and comfortable shoes. Her hair was neatly tied back, and she carried only a small bag, suggesting she preferred to travel light. Despite the chaos around her, she moved with purpose, her eyes scanning her surroundings in a way that was natural yet attentive. As she approached the security checkpoint, she joined the line of passengers waiting to have their bags scanned and boarding passes checked. People around her chatted casually, some nervously checked their watches and others fidgeted with their phones. She, however, seemed calm and collected. The security personnel glanced at her boarding pass and quickly directed her to the scanning machine. She placed her bag on the conveyor belt and walked through the metal detector without hesitation. The process was routine, but her demeanor remained composed, observant, and professional. After passing through security, she moved toward the gate, where passengers were beginning to line up for boarding. The gate area was crowded with people sitting on chairs, standing near the windows looking at planes and talking in small groups. The woman found a quiet spot near the window, standing alone but alert, watching as passengers moved around her. Her gaze was calm, yet it seemed to take in every detail, noting who was walking past, which passengers appeared anxious, and how the flight attendants were managing the crowd. A flight attendant, a woman in her late 20s with a bright smile and an energetic demeanor, noticed the woman. Something about her caught the attendant's attention. Perhaps it was the calm, almost deliberate way she observed the surroundings, or the fact that she stood slightly apart from the crowd. Whatever it was, the attendant felt a pang of suspicion. She had seen travelers of all kinds, but this woman seemed different. She whispered quietly to a colleague, pointing subtly in the woman's direction. The colleague followed her gaze but saw nothing unusual, merely a woman waiting patiently to board her flight. Boarding began in an orderly fashion, with passengers grouped according to seat numbers. The woman joined her group, walking steadily toward the plane. As she approached the aircraft door, the attendant observed her closely. Every step the woman took seemed measured and precise, her posture straight and composed. There was nothing aggressive, threatening, or unusual about her, yet the attendant's unease grew. She watched the woman with narrowed eyes, noting the calm expression on her face and the small bag she carried. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Inside the plane, the woman moved down the aisle with ease, greeting the flight attendants with a polite nod. She selected her seat, stowed her bag neatly in the overhead compartment, and settled in. The cabin was filling quickly with passengers, the low murmur of conversation and the rustling of bags creating a steady background noise. The woman remained alert, her eyes occasionally flicking toward the aisle, observing other passengers as they took their seats. She appeared to be relaxed, reading a small booklet, but her attention to detail suggested she was more aware of her surroundings than most. The flight attendant continued to watch her, whispering to a colleague about her observations. She seemed certain that this woman was acting suspiciously. Even though nothing concrete had occurred, she recalled past experiences and stories of passengers who had caused problems during flights, and she compared this woman's calmness to those memories. In her mind, there was a possibility that something was hidden beneath the composed exterior. The thought grew in her mind, twisting into a sense of caution mixed with doubt. As the flight prepared for departure, the woman remained composed. She checked her seatbelt, glanced briefly at the safety instructions, and observed the behavior of the cabin crew. She seemed interested in the routine but not distracted by it. There was a sense of awareness about her, an alertness that suggested she was ready for any situation. Her movements were deliberate but unobtrusive, blending into the environment while simultaneously monitoring it. Passengers around her chatted quietly or stared out the windows, oblivious to the tension building between the flight attendant and the woman. Some noticed the attendant's occasional glances toward her, but most were focused on their own routines. The woman herself appeared unaffected, maintaining her calm composure, never looking directly at the attendant, but occasionally making subtle notes of what was happening around her. It was almost as if she was observing everyone else while being observed herself. The engines roared to life and the plane began taxiing toward the runway. The cabin lights dimmed slightly, and the flight attendants walked down the aisle, checking that everyone was seated and ready for takeoff. The woman adjusted her posture, ensuring her seatbelt was secure and that her bag was stowed properly. She did not fidget or show signs of nervousness, yet her eyes briefly scanned the overhead compartments, the passengers and the attendants, noting details that most people would overlook. Her awareness was subtle but thorough, revealing her training and experience. The flight attendant approached her, smiling politely, though her eyes betrayed the unease she felt. She greeted the woman with a friendly tone but asked a few casual questions, trying to gauge her reactions. The woman responded calmly, politely, and with no hint of deception. She answered questions about her seat, her bag, and her travel plans naturally, without hesitation. Despite the attendant's scrutiny, there was no sign of wrongdoing. Yet the feeling of suspicion lingered, growing quietly in the attendant's mind. Passengers continued to settle into their seats, the hum of conversation mixing with the low rumble of the engines. Some were excited for the trip, others tired or anxious. The woman remained focused, calm, and composed, her attention subtly divided between her personal space and the overall environment. She did not draw unnecessary attention to herself, yet her presence was commanding in a quiet way. It was a presence that suggested competence, experience, and awareness. As the plane began its ascent, the cabin crew performed their routine checks and announcements. The woman listened carefully, nodding at safety instructions, and then returned to her booklet. Her movements were smooth, deliberate, and composed, never rushed or careless. She exuded a sense of control and confidence that contrasted with the flight attendant's growing unease. The attendant whispered to a colleague once more, sharing her observations and concerns. The colleague looked at the woman and shrugged, unable to see what the first attendant perceived. But the sense of unease was growing steadily. The flight settled into cruising altitude, and passengers relaxed slightly, some reclining their seats, others reading, napping, or chatting. The woman remained vigilant, her awareness never fully relaxing. She observed patterns, movements, and interactions, noting details in a way that would not alarm others but would allow her to react quickly if necessary. There was a quiet intensity to her, a sense of readiness that went unnoticed by most, but clearly unsettled the attendant. The flight attendant, meanwhile, continued her duties, offering drinks, assisting passengers, and occasionally glancing toward the woman. Each glance seemed to confirm her suspicions, though nothing tangible had occurred. She felt a growing sense of responsibility and anxiety, as if she needed to act before something went wrong. The passengers, unaware of the tension building, continued their routines, oblivious to the silent drama unfolding nearby. As hours passed and the flight continued smoothly, the woman remained composed, observing, listening, and maintaining her calm presence. She interacted politely with attendants and nearby passengers when necessary, but her primary focus seemed to remain on the overall environment. Her calm demeanor and measured actions contrasted with the flight attendant's growing unease, highlighting a silent tension that few could perceive, but which was building steadily in the cabin. By the time the plane approached its destination, the stage was set for the next series of events. The woman had remained composed, alert, and professional throughout the journey, giving nothing away yet maintaining complete control over her environment. The flight attendant, increasingly uneasy, had watched her closely for hours, convinced that something was hidden beneath the woman's calm exterior. The passengers, still unaware, were focused on preparing for landing, unaware of the quiet tension that had developed around them. The scene was ready for the next chapter, where assumptions, perceptions, and reality would collide in ways no one aboard the plane could yet predict. The flight continued smoothly for the first hour, with passengers settling into a rhythm of quiet conversation, reading or simply looking out the window at the clouds below. The woman remained in her seat, calm and composed, occasionally glancing around the cabin. She maintained a neutral expression, polite nods for anyone who made brief eye contact and subtle observation of her surroundings. Her movements were minimal, but deliberate, showing confidence and control. The flight attendant, however, could not shake the uneasy feeling that had begun the moment the woman boarded. She continued her service, offering drinks and checking on passengers, but her eyes kept drifting toward the woman. Every small action the woman took, from adjusting her seat to reaching into her bag for a small notebook, seemed amplified in the attendant's mind. She whispered quietly to a colleague about her concerns, noting the woman's unusual calmness. Her colleague offered a reassuring smile, insisting that the passenger was likely just calm and confident, but the first attendant remained unconvinced. As the flight attendants passed through the aisle, handing out beverages and snacks, the woman accepted a cup of water with a polite nod. Her demeanor was flawless. Nothing in her posture or behavior suggested any kind of threat. Yet the attendant noticed the way her eyes subtly scanned the aisle before sitting back in her seat. She thought of passengers she had seen in the past who had caused trouble, and the calmness of this woman struck a chord of worry. She decided to observe more closely, walking the aisle slowly and watching each gesture. Moments later, a young child sitting a few rows ahead began to cry. The woman looked toward the child briefly, her expression softening in a gentle, empathetic way, then returned her attention to the cabin. She made a small note in her notebook, not drawing attention to herself. The attendant interpreted the act as suspicious, imagining the woman might be making secret communications or signals. The imagination of fear began to grow, fueled by a lack of understanding about the woman's professional training and awareness. The woman's phone buzzed softly on her lap. She glanced at it, typed a brief message, and set it down without drawing attention. Again, the flight attendant noticed and misinterpreted the behavior, imagining the worst-case scenario. Her heart began to race slightly as she tried to stay professional, while internally debating whether she should escalate the situation. The woman's calm, methodical actions seemed unusual to the attendant, who had never encountered a passenger who remained so composed under observation. The flight attendants prepared for the meal service, wheeling carts down the narrow aisle. The woman chose to skip the snack, shaking her head politely when offered a small sandwich. She then leaned back in her seat, hands folded calmly in her lap, eyes briefly closing as if resting. The attendant watched, growing increasingly uneasy. She whispered again to a colleague, describing the woman's behavior in detail, the scanning of the surroundings, the note-taking, the composed responses. Her colleague listened but did not see anything wrong, reinforcing the sense of isolation the attendant felt in her concern. Passengers around the woman continued their routines, some reading, some watching movies, some chatting quietly. No one seemed to notice the silent tension building in the aisle. The woman's presence was subtle, yet her alertness and awareness created a quiet aura of authority. She seemed attuned to every sound, movement, and gesture around her. While nothing about her was aggressive, there was a sense of readiness that the flight attendant could not interpret, only feel. The attendant's concern reached a tipping point when the woman reached into her bag again, this time pulling out a small inconspicuous device that she handled briefly before putting it away. The attendant's imagination ran wild, convinced she had seen something suspicious. She whispered urgently to another crew member, suggesting they monitor the woman more closely. The colleague, cautious but unconvinced, agreed to keep an eye on her, but warned against jumping to conclusions. The tension in the cabin remained invisible to the passengers, who continued their ordinary activities. The woman noticed the occasional glance from the flight attendant, but did not react. She maintained a serene expression, aware of the attention but not allowing it to disturb her composure. Her training allowed her to remain calm in any situation, and she understood that the flight attendant's suspicion stemmed from misunderstanding rather than actual concern. She subtly adjusted her posture, relaxed her shoulders, and continued her observation, making notes quietly without drawing attention. Suddenly, turbulence caused the plane to shake slightly, prompting a few passengers to gasp. The woman's reaction was immediate but controlled. She braced herself slightly, ensured her seatbelt was secure, and remained calm, offering a reassuring smile to a nearby passenger who looked worried. Her composure contrasted sharply with the flight attendant's growing nervousness, highlighting the gap between perception and reality. The attendant, now almost certain something was amiss, began to plan how to handle the situation without alarming other passengers. As the flight continued, the woman's subtle actions continued. She took brief notes, occasionally scanned the passengers, and listened attentively to the announcements. The attendant continued her observation, growing increasingly frustrated that nothing overtly suspicious occurred. Her mind raced with scenarios and worst-case possibilities, interpreting every calm gesture as deliberate concealment. She was convinced that by the time they landed, she would need to take some action, though she had no evidence beyond her intuition. A few passengers approached the woman with questions, Curious about her calm demeanor and professional aura, she responded politely and informatively, never raising her voice, never showing impatience. Her answers were precise, clear, and helpful. Some passengers smiled, appreciating her composure. The flight attendant noticed this interaction and misread it as calculated, deliberate manipulation, confirming her suspicions further in her mind. She began to imagine scenarios in which the woman might cause disruption or harm, fueled by her lack of understanding of the woman's true role. Meanwhile, the woman subtly ensured her surroundings were orderly, adjusting her bag slightly to keep it secure, noting the positions of passengers who seemed restless, and remaining alert for any potential issues. Her awareness was methodical but invisible to the casual observer. She understood the importance of blending in while maintaining readiness. Every gesture was natural, nothing exaggerated, nothing meant to alarm. Yet the flight attendant continued to interpret the normal, controlled actions as suspicious, increasing the tension in the aisle. Hours passed, and the plane moved steadily toward its destination. The woman's vigilance never wavered, though her composure remained perfect. She interacted when necessary, observed constantly, and made subtle notes without anyone noticing. The flight attendant's anxiety grew with each passing moment. Her concern became an internal struggle between professional responsibility and personal fear. She worried about being wrong, about missing something, and about the safety of passengers, though she had no proof of wrongdoing. The woman noticed the tension building, but she did not confront it directly. She continued her quiet observation, aware that patience and composure were her strongest tools. Her presence was calm, steady, and unassuming, yet her attention to detail was unmatched. The flight attendant, on the other hand, felt increasingly pressured to act, convinced that the woman's calm demeanor was a mask for something hidden. The contrast between the two created an unspoken drama, invisible to the majority of passengers. As the flight approached its midpoint, the woman's subtle signals and observations prepared her for the next phase. She knew that the situation with the flight attendant could escalate, if not managed carefully. Every detail of her surroundings was noted, from passenger behavior to crew movements. She remained ready, calm, and controlled, embodying the experience and professionalism of someone trained for high-stakes observation. The attendant, now almost certain of a hidden threat, began planning a strategy to involve airport security upon landing. She imagined the scenario of reporting a suspicious passenger, of potential delays, and of the reactions of her colleagues. She whispered one last time to a fellow crew member, reinforcing her belief that action would be necessary. The woman, unaware of the specifics of the attendant's concern but fully aware of the watchful eyes upon her, continued to maintain her calm, preparing for the next series of interactions that would soon unfold. The passengers, still oblivious, continued their routines. Some slept, some read, some chatted quietly. None could see the silent tension growing in the aisle, the quiet standoff between perception and reality. The woman remained a figure of calm, poised observation, while the flight attendant remained caught in her web of suspicion and imagination. The stage was set for the next act, where accusations, misunderstandings, and the reality of the woman's true role would collide in a way no one could predict. The flight continued, each moment building anticipation for the inevitable encounter that would change the perspective of everyone involved. The flight continued, smooth at first, but the tension between the woman and the flight attendant had not eased. The attendant could not stop herself from observing every movement, every glance, every subtle action the woman took. She convinced herself that there must be something hidden beneath the calm exterior, though nothing concrete had yet appeared. The woman remained serene, her attention quietly divided between the environment, the passengers, and the subtle signals she was observing. At one point, the woman stood to stretch her legs, walking slowly down the aisle. Her steps were measured, precise, yet relaxed. She smiled briefly at a passenger seated near the window and offered a polite nod to another seated across the aisle. The flight attendant's gaze followed her every step, noting the controlled movements, the unhurried pace, and the careful positioning of her bag. The attendant whispered again to a colleague, outlining what she perceived as unusual behavior. The colleague, trying to be reasonable, suggested that calm and careful movement is normal for travelers. But the first attendant was not convinced. The woman returned to her seat, adjusting her notebook quietly on the tray table. She flipped a page slowly, reading briefly and then making a small note. She never drew attention to herself, but her awareness of the cabin and its passengers was keen. Her eyes occasionally flicked toward the flight attendant, not in challenge but in acknowledgement. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, yet it reminded the attendant that the woman noticed her attention and that her calmness was deliberate. As the flight continued, turbulence caused a brief jolt, and a few passengers gasped. The woman immediately adjusted her posture, keeping herself steady while offering a reassuring smile to the person next to her. Her hands remained calm in her lap, and she did not make any unnecessary movement. The flight attendant interpreted this controlled reaction as highly unusual, imagining that only someone hiding something would maintain such perfect composure under stress. Her mind began creating scenarios, each more elaborate than the last, imagining the worst-case possibilities. A child in a nearby row spilled their drink, causing a minor commotion. The woman quickly handed a napkin to the parent, keeping her expression friendly but neutral. She offered no comment, no judgment, just a simple, helpful gesture. Yet the flight attendant saw this too as calculated, a display of charm designed to mask hidden motives. Her imagination fueled a sense of urgency, a need to act even though there was no evidence to justify alarm. The attendant's concern was growing stronger, her thoughts racing with questions about what the woman might be planning. Meanwhile, the woman continued to observe discreetly. Her training allowed her to remain calm while maintaining awareness. She noticed the flight attendant's frequent glances, the way she whispered to colleagues, and the growing unease that subtly spread through the crew. She understood the potential for misunderstanding but knew that patience was key. Acting prematurely could draw attention, and she had to remain in control while keeping the situation calm for everyone on board. The flight attendant, frustrated by her inability to identify any real threat, decided to approach the woman more directly. She walked down the aisle, her steps purposeful but still polite, and stopped next to the woman's seat. Her voice was friendly but contained an undercurrent of concern. She asked questions about the woman's belongings, about her seat and her travel plans. The woman responded clearly, calmly, and politely. She explained her purpose for carrying her items, her seating preference, and her travel itinerary. Every answer was precise and courteous, yet the attendant still felt uneasy. She could not reconcile the calm, controlled demeanor with her growing fear that something was being hidden. The passengers nearby watched the interaction with curiosity, noticing the polite exchange but not the underlying tension. Some assumed the attendant was simply being attentive, while others thought the woman was exceptionally composed and polite. Nobody could sense the silent battle of perception that was unfolding. The woman answered each question without hesitation, her voice steady, her tone neutral. Her composure did not waver even for a moment, which only made the flight attendant more anxious. A few passengers attempted to distract themselves by reading, watching a movie, or closing their eyes for a brief nap. The woman, however, remained vigilant. She subtly scanned the cabin, noting the movements of passengers, the positions of the crew, and the overall environment. She made small adjustments to her notebook and personal items to keep everything orderly, maintaining awareness without drawing attention. Every movement was intentional yet unnoticeable, a quiet display of her expertise. The flight attendant's concern grew as she noticed how methodical the woman's actions were. Every glance, every subtle movement, every polite gesture seemed perfectly calculated. She whispered again to a colleague, suggesting that the passenger might be hiding something important. The colleague nodded but remained unconvinced, advising patience. The attendant, however, was now fully invested in her belief that action would soon be necessary. Her imagination ran wild, filling in gaps with worst-case scenarios and creating a sense of urgency that bordered on panic. The woman noticed the subtle tension, but did not react aggressively. She remained calm, adjusting her posture slightly and returning her attention to her surroundings. She observed the flight attendant's approach, understanding that suspicion often arises from misinterpretation rather than evidence. Her training allowed her to remain patient, to wait for the right moment to act if needed, and to maintain control of the environment. Her calm demeanor was deliberate, a tool to prevent unnecessary escalation while allowing her to monitor the situation. As the flight progressed, the woman noticed a few passengers becoming uncomfortable with the silent tension in the cabin. She offered polite smiles to those nearby, subtle gestures of reassurance without drawing attention to the underlying situation. Her awareness of human behavior allowed her to maintain calm, not just for herself but for others around her. Every gesture, every subtle movement was carefully considered, keeping the cabin environment stable. The flight attendant, growing more anxious, began thinking about how she might involve airport security upon landing. She considered what to say, how to describe the passenger, and what the reaction of her colleagues might be. Her mind raced with scenarios, each more detailed and urgent than the last. She whispered again to a colleague, trying to convince them that action would soon be necessary, though there was still no evidence beyond her perception. Her focus remained fixed on the woman, interpreting each calm action as deliberate concealment. Meanwhile, the woman's awareness continued to guide her. She made note of passenger behavior, subtle sounds and movements that could indicate any potential problem. Her actions were methodical but discreet, maintaining a balance between observation and blending into the environment. She understood that remaining composed and unobtrusive was critical to managing the situation without drawing unnecessary attention. The turbulence grew slightly stronger, causing some passengers to tighten their seatbelts and adjust their posture. The woman remained composed, subtly ensuring her surroundings were safe and orderly. She offered quiet reassurance to a nervous passenger nearby, a gentle nod and a calm expression. Her presence was calming yet controlled, demonstrating a quiet authority that contrasted sharply with the flight attendant's growing unease. Passengers continued to engage in their routines, some reading, some watching a movie, some quietly conversing. They were unaware of the silent tension building in the aisle, the quiet standoff between perception and reality. The woman maintained her calm, methodical observation, while the flight attendant's concern intensified. Every gesture, every glance, every note the woman made seemed to confirm the attendant's suspicions. Even though nothing overtly dangerous had occurred, the woman subtly adjusted her position in her seat, keeping her movement smooth and deliberate. She glanced briefly at the flight attendant, acknowledging the attention without confrontation. Her calmness and poise highlighted the contrast between her composed presence and the attendant's growing anxiety. The silent tension in the aisle was palpable, unnoticed by most passengers, yet significant in shaping the unfolding situation. As the flight approached the final leg of the journey, the woman prepared for the landing process, ensuring her seatbelt was secure and her belongings properly stowed. She remained calm, alert, and composed, ready for any interactions that might arise. The flight attendant, increasingly convinced of a hidden threat, prepared to escalate her concern once the plane touched down. The stage was set for the next act, where assumptions, perceptions, and reality would collide, revealing the true nature of the situation and the woman's professional role. The tension in the cabin was quiet but growing, each moment bringing the story closer to a critical turning point that no one on board could yet fully understand. The plane began its descent, the city below slowly coming into view through the small windows. The passengers started to prepare for landing, adjusting seatbelts, stowing tray tables, and organizing personal items. The woman remained composed, her posture calm, her attention quietly scanning the cabin. Every gesture was measured, reflecting a sense of readiness and control that contrasted sharply with the nervous energy of some passengers around her. The flight attendant's unease had grown steadily. She watched the woman with a mix of concern and anticipation. The calmness of the woman's demeanor, her quiet focus, and her subtle observation of the surroundings had convinced the attendant that something unusual was happening. He whispered once more to a colleague, suggesting they keep a close eye as the plane landed. The colleague nodded but remained skeptical, reminding her that appearances can be deceiving. Still, the attendant could not shake the feeling that she might be dealing with someone hiding a serious secret. As the plane touched down smoothly, a small cheer from a few passengers broke the quiet. Others focused on securing their belongings and preparing to exit. The woman adjusted her bag slightly, ensuring it was secure, and observed the passengers around her. Her eyes were calm but alert, noting the movements of the crew and the subtle signs of passengers' nervousness. She did not speak unnecessarily, her demeanor composed, professional, and reassuring. The flight attendant approached her, speaking in a polite but firm tone. She asked a few routine questions about her bag and travel documents, still convinced that the woman might be hiding something important. The woman responded clearly and calmly, explaining her items and her travel purpose in simple, straightforward terms. Each response was measured, polite, and confident. She did not appear defensive, only factual. Yet the attendant remained uneasy, misinterpreting the calmness as deliberate concealment. Passengers nearby glanced curiously at the exchange, sensing tension but unable to understand its cause. Some whispered quietly to one another, wondering if a minor incident had occurred. The woman remained composed, offering subtle reassurances through her body language and demeanor. Her calmness served as a quiet anchor amidst the growing tension in the cabin. The attendant, still convinced of a hidden threat, signaled subtly to the ground staff waiting to assist upon landing. She described her observations in hushed tones, highlighting the woman's calmness, her attention to detail, and her deliberate actions. The ground staff listened politely but remained neutral, prepared to respond if necessary. The woman noticed the gestures but did not react. Understanding that misinterpretations could escalate unnecessarily, she maintained her composure, aware that her patience was key to resolving the situation smoothly. As the passengers began to disembark, the woman waited calmly for her turn. She observed the flow of people, noting the pace, the potential obstacles, and the crew's movements. Her attention to detail was subtle, invisible to most, yet crucial for maintaining situational awareness. The flight attendant followed, still unsure but preparing to report what she perceived as unusual behavior. Every step seemed deliberate, measured, and controlled, creating an almost tangible tension that hovered in the cabin. When the woman reached the aisle, the flight attendant addressed her directly, asking a few more questions about her bag and her travel itinerary. The woman responded politely, her tone calm and reassuring. Then, in a moment that stunned the attendant, she revealed her identification as an undercover agent working on a mission related to airport and airline security. She explained briefly, without detail that could compromise her work, that her presence had a professional purpose and that her calm demeanor was part of her training. The revelation caused a wave of disbelief and surprise, particularly for the flight attendant who had misjudged her from the start. Passengers nearby paused, curious about the sudden explanation. Some whispered to one another, trying to understand the unusual interaction. The attendant felt a mixture of relief and embarrassment. She realized that her suspicions had been based on assumptions rather than evidence. Her face flushed slightly, her posture momentarily tense as she processed the truth. The agent's calm explanation and professional conduct left no room for doubt. She had been acting in accordance with her duties. And the attendant's assumptions were simply that, assumptions. The woman continued to speak, her voice calm and measured, ensuring that the situation remained composed. She thanked the flight attendant for her vigilance, acknowledging that her concern for passenger safety was valid. The flight attendant nodded, accepting the apology and the explanation, her sense of tension slowly dissipating. The colleague who had been skeptical earlier offered a relieved smile, silently acknowledging the agent's professionalism and composure. As passengers continued to disembark, the woman moved with purpose, ensuring that her actions were efficient and unobtrusive. She acknowledged the brief nods and polite gestures from passengers who had observed the tension without fully understanding it. Her presence was quietly reassuring, a steady reminder of calm and professionalism amidst the residual confusion. She walked with confidence, never hasty, never flustered, maintaining an air of authority that contrasted sharply with the flight attendant's earlier unease. The flight attendant, reflecting on the experience, began to recognize the lessons in humility and perspective. She understood that calm, composed behavior could be misinterpreted, that vigilance must be paired with patience, and that assumptions can cloud judgment. She quietly apologized internally for her misjudgment, appreciating the professionalism and skill demonstrated by the woman. The experience was a reminder that appearances are often deceiving, and that observation alone does not always reveal the full story. Outside the plane, ground staff and security personnel maintained a discreet presence. The woman's explanation had prevented unnecessary escalation, and her calm demeanor had ensured that the situation remained under control. The flight attendant briefly debriefed with colleagues, recounting the observations and the eventual revelation. The story was a lesson in perception, bias, and professionalism, emphasizing that training, composure, and patience are essential in high-pressure situations. Passengers continued to exit the plane, many unaware of the silent drama that had unfolded. Some glanced curiously at the woman, noticing her calm, professional demeanor and appreciating the subtle reassurance it provided. Others focused on retrieving luggage and heading toward their next destination. The agent remained composed, completing her professional responsibilities efficiently and quietly, ensuring that the experience remained safe and orderly for everyone. The flight attendant, now fully aware of the woman's role, took a deep breath and allowed herself to relax. She had witnessed firsthand the consequences of misjudgment and the importance of patience. The realization that the woman had been performing a professional duty, not a suspicious act, offered a valuable lesson in humility and perspective. She walked toward the terminal with a renewed sense of respect for the unseen responsibilities and skills that some individuals carry out quietly, ensuring safety and order. The woman, meanwhile, proceeded toward her next objective, her calm composure intact. She had managed the situation with skill and professionalism, maintaining awareness without drawing attention, and turning potential conflict into understanding. Her presence had quietly reassured passengers and crew alike, demonstrating that true professionalism lies in calm, careful, and deliberate action. The encounter left a lingering impression on everyone involved. Passengers would remember the composed woman, the tension that had subtly affected the flight, and the eventual revelation of her role. The flight attendant would carry the experience as a lesson, reminding herself that perception can be flawed and that professionalism requires patience, observation, and humility. The quiet resolution served as a powerful reminder that calmness, skill, and awareness are often invisible yet essential elements in ensuring safety and order in any environment. As the crowd dispersed and the terminal filled with the sounds of luggage wheels, conversations, and announcements, the woman's calm presence remained a quiet anchor in memory. The flight attendant, reflecting on the incident, understood that vigilance is valuable but must always be tempered with understanding and patience. The passengers, unaware of the full extent of the drama, continued on their journeys, carrying with them only subtle impressions of professionalism and quiet strength they had observed. The story, though brief and unassuming, served as a testament to composure, skill, and the unseen efforts that keep people safe and secure every day. The plane had emptied, and the terminal was bustling with travelers moving in every direction. The passengers who had observed the quiet tension aboard the flight were now blending into the crowd, many reflecting on the brief moments of unease and the calm resolution that had followed. The woman, having completed her mission, moved with a sense of purpose. She remained composed, her posture straight, her expression calm and confident, a quiet presence amidst the busy environment. The flight attendant watched her from a distance, feeling a mixture of relief, embarrassment, and newfound respect. She realized how her assumptions had caused unnecessary tension and that she had misjudged the woman entirely. The experience left a lasting impression, teaching her the importance of patience, observation, and understanding. She quietly vowed to approach future situations with more awareness and less assumption, recognizing that appearances can be deceiving and that calm, collected individuals are not always what they seem. As the woman moved through the terminal, she maintained her professional composure. Her steps were steady, deliberate, and confident. She nodded politely to airport staff, acknowledged brief greetings from passengers, and made her way to a quieter area where she could complete her next set of responsibilities. Her actions were efficient but unobtrusive, demonstrating her ability to maintain control without drawing unnecessary attention. She remained aware of her surroundings, prepared for any unforeseen developments, yet calm and composed. Passengers who had witnessed the subtle interactions during the flight began to discuss the experience quietly among themselves. Some expressed admiration for the woman's calm demeanor. Others were surprised at how a situation that had seemed tense and possibly alarming had resolved so smoothly. A few reflected on their own assumptions and biases, realizing that the quiet professionalism of someone can easily be misinterpreted. The flight had offered a lesson in human behavior, observation, and the importance of composure under pressure. The flight attendant, still processing the events, took a moment to speak with colleagues. She recounted the sequence of interactions, highlighting the moments of tension and the eventual revelation. Her colleagues listened attentively, some offering understanding nods, others reflecting on how similar misunderstandings could happen in their own experiences. The conversation was calm and reflective, a learning moment for all involved. It reinforced the idea that vigilance is important, but it must be paired with patience, understanding, and the recognition that assumptions can mislead. Meanwhile, the woman completed the remaining steps of her mission with quiet precision. She contacted her agency through secure channels, providing a brief update on the flight and the interactions with the crew. Her communication was concise, factual, and professional, ensuring that her team was informed while maintaining the confidentiality of her operation. She continued to move through the terminal with purpose, blending in seamlessly with the other travelers, her presence calm yet commanding. A small group of airport security personnel who had been alerted to her presence observed her briefly, noting her composed demeanor and professional conduct. They recognized her as someone carrying out a legitimate and important duty. Their respect for her skill and composure was evident in their nods and discreet observations. The woman acknowledged their presence with a polite nod, maintaining her focus and professionalism while ensuring that the environment remained orderly and secure. The passengers, now moving toward baggage claim and the exits, carried with them a sense of relief and subtle admiration. Some reflected on how the situation had been misinterpreted and how easily calm, collected behavior could be mistaken for something suspicious. Others admired the quiet confidence and professionalism that the woman had displayed throughout the flight. The experience became a quiet story of composure, observation, and human understanding, leaving a lasting impression on those who had witnessed it. The flight attendant, reflecting on the event, recognized the importance of humility in her role. She understood that her assumptions had caused unnecessary tension, and that her observations, while well-intentioned, had been clouded by bias and incomplete information. She made a mental note to approach similar situations in the future, with greater patience and a willingness to consider alternative explanations. The experience reinforced the need for balance between vigilance and understanding, between caution and empathy. The woman, having completed her mission, took a moment to breathe deeply and relax her shoulders. Her composure remained intact, but she allowed herself a small internal acknowledgement of satisfaction. She had navigated a tense and potentially complicated situation with skill, ensuring the safety and order of the passengers while maintaining her own discretion and professionalism. Her calm demeanor had diffused potential misunderstandings, and her presence had provided reassurance to those around her without drawing unnecessary attention. As she exited the terminal, she moved with quiet purpose toward her next assignment. Her focus was steady, her awareness keen, and her professionalism unwavering. She understood that her role required not only vigilance and skill, but also the ability to remain composed under scrutiny, to manage perception, and to maintain a calm presence even when others might misinterpret her actions. Her experience on this flight reinforced the importance of patience, observation, and the careful management of interactions in high-pressure environments. The passengers continued their journeys, many now reflecting on the lessons they had witnessed. Some considered how assumptions and quick judgments can mislead, while others admired the calm and composed presence of the woman who had quietly managed the situation. The flight attendant, now more aware of her own reactions and biases, continued her duties with renewed understanding and humility. The experience had provided a profound lesson in observation, human behavior, and the importance of maintaining composure under pressure. The story of the flight remained a subtle but memorable experience for those involved. It highlighted the importance of patience, understanding, and careful observation, and it underscored the value of professionalism in managing potentially tense situations. The woman's calm demeanor and skillful management of the flight environment had turned a situation that could have escalated into a lesson in perception, bias, and human understanding. As the day continued, the woman remained focused on her professional responsibilities. She moved with the same calm composure, her awareness keen and her actions deliberate. Her experience on the flight reinforced her belief in the importance of patience, observation, and careful management of human interactions. She had successfully navigated a challenging situation without drawing attention, ensuring safety, order, and understanding for everyone involved. The flight attendant continued to reflect on the experience, now sharing her insights with colleagues and peers. She spoke of the importance of humility, the dangers of assumptions, and the value of calm observation. The story became a quiet teaching moment, emphasizing that true professionalism involves patience, understanding, and the careful balance of vigilance and empathy. It was a reminder that appearances can deceive, and that composure and skill are often invisible but critical in maintaining safety and order. Passengers carried the memory of the flight forward, some recalling the subtle tension, others admiring the calm professionalism that had resolved it. The woman's presence had provided reassurance and order without disrupting the environment, demonstrating the quiet power of composure and skill. The flight attendant, humbled and reflective, understood the value of observation tempered with understanding, and she carried that lesson into her future interactions. The terminal continued to buzz with activity, but the memory of the flight lingered. It was a story of calm professionalism and human understanding. The woman's skill, patience, and composure had turned a potentially tense situation into a lesson for all involved. Her quiet presence had reminded everyone that true professionalism lies not in drawing attention but in maintaining control, awareness, and calm under pressure. In the end, the story of the flight became a quiet reflection on human behavior, observation, and the importance of composure. It left passengers with subtle lessons about assumptions, judgment, and the unseen efforts that ensure safety and order. The flight attendant carried forward her newfound understanding. The passengers remembered the calm professionalism, and the woman continued her duties with unwavering composure, quietly shaping the environment around her and leaving a lasting impression without a single moment of unnecessary alarm or disruption.